Does anybody remember the movie The Blues Brothers? And then you all know Colonel Sanders, right? Kentucky Fried Chicken. Well, I have a friend. His name is Jerry. And if you take John Belushi and you take the Colonel and you mash them together, that's what my friend Jerry would look like. Now, the reason I tell you that is because Jerry is very unique. Jerry is 78 years old and is very active. He does many things, travels across the United States all by himself. And you may not think that's such a big deal. But when he was 25, he lost his eyesight in a car wreck. So since the time he's been 25, he's been blind. And he had a choice to make. He could either sit on his couch and rot away in darkness for the rest of his life and probably die young. But Jerry chose a different path. Jerry decided that he was going to learn a new way of seeing. And you're thinking, well, that's crazy. He's blind. There's no way he could possibly see. Well, let me tell you a story. Since Jerry is blind, he can't drive, as you might guess. So he relies on other people and other systems to get him where he needs to go. And one day, I was lucky enough to give him a ride from a Toastmaster meeting at the Toyota plant in Georgetown, Kentucky. And on the way home, where the two interstates merge together, just before that, Jerry turns to me and says, "Hey, Dan, are you going to take Newtown Pike or exit 115? I said, "Well, Jerry, that's what I thought I was going to do." And he says, "Well, this time of day, that road is a parking lot." Now remember, he's blind, and he had the presence of mind to tell me that before I merged onto the interstate. So I said, "Okay, Jerry, where should I go?" He says, "Well, go down the road and take the Winchester Road exit, 113. I said, "Okay, no problem." So Jerry and I are talking, and a little while later he said, "Dan, in just a second, you should see a green interstate sign that says Winchester Road exit." And sure enough, I looked up, and there was the sign. And so I took the Winchester Road exit, and we're driving along, and I said, "Jerry, how is it that you know exactly where you are?" I said, "You're blind. You can't tell." He says, "I've learned to see where I am." And so we're driving to his house, and he tells me, he gives me an instruction. He says, "I want you to turn right on the next road." And I'm like, "Okay." And we're talking, and he's telling me about his experience and how he went from being blind at 25 to being able to do all these amazing things. And I'm just so engrossed in his story. And then he stops in mid-sentence. He says, "Dan, you missed the turn." And sure enough, I missed the turn. He knew exactly where he was at all times. Luckily, I was able to make it to his house without any further problems. But it goes to show you that no matter what kind of change you go through in life, if you take the time to learn to see in a different way, you can be successful. Now, I Googled this, so we all know everything you find on Google is 100% correct, right? No. 98%, or lean fails 98% of the time. Now, actually, I had a conversation with Chuck last night, and we were talking about this. And he politely reminded me, and rightfully so, it's not lean that fails. What is it that fails? What fails? We do, right? It's the human part of the process that fails. We fail to implement lean the way that it should be. And so my experience, I don't know that it's 98%, but I can tell you, having worked for the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which is an organization in the United States that helps small to medium-sized manufacturers learn lean concepts, that the majority of them do fail at lean. They do good for a little while, but then it tapers off, and then it disappears. Sometimes it comes back, depending on who's managing, but it goes back. It's cyclical. So my first experience with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership was a lunch that I had where they brought all the project managers together so they could meet me because I was the new kid on the block. And we're sitting at lunch, and the senior project manager, he looks at me and he says, "So Dan, how many 5S events have you facilitated?" "Well, Tim, I've never facilitated a 5S event." "What? You worked for Toyota for 15 years and you've never facilitated a 5S event?" I said, "No, I don't even know what a 5S event is." He says, "What?" I said, "Well, why don't you tell me?" He says, "Oh, it's so simple. It's sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and sustain." I said, "Tim, that's where we're miscommunicating." I said, "At Toyota, we only had 4 S's. Sort, set in order, standardize, or shine, and standardize." See, it's once you have that standard in place, everybody understands, because everybody at Toyota eventually develops what we call a problem-solving mindset. And they know, based on the standard, that that's the way things should be, and they begin that problem-solving process to figure out why it's not the way it should be, instead of looking at creating additional work like sustain. In sustain, we add a lot of extra duties and responsibilities to leaders to make sure that the 5S stays in place. But the problem is when we add all those extra duties, what happens to those extra duties when production takes a priority? Exactly. Gone, right? That's in the back. We don't care about that. So it really needs to be a mindset. Now, since working for the MEP system for several years, I also found out that people really don't understand it because there's 5S, there's 6S, and 7S. So 5S, they add the sustain. 6S, well, we add safety. And in 7S, we add savings. But at Toyota, we look through what's called the Toyota Eye. And all of those things are part of the way we filter information that comes into our brain. Now, a perfect example. This is a manufacturer that sprays molten metal onto the leading edge of aluminum aircraft parts to increase their durability and their lifespan. And this is a turnstile that has all the different types of masking tape that they use. And so during a 5S event, one of the things they did was they cleaned up these turnstiles and they actually got rid of them because there was a lot of damage to that very expensive tape. And they also didn't know what kind of tape they had or if they had what they needed for the next job coming up. So the answer was to create a pegboard and put the tape on the pegboard so that they knew exactly what kind of tape they had, how much they had, and it made it easy for the team leader who would be making his rounds for him to look at it and decide or help them get the tape they needed without them having to leave the process. And there was a great deal of savings just behind this one little activity. There was much more that happened, but just one activity, there was so much more that happened. So I came back 6 months later, and what they had done is they went back to the old way of doing things. So when I came there, I said, why did you go back to those turnstiles and eliminate all that savings you had? And he says, well, Dan, our culture here is one, a friendly culture, and our associates, they're allowed to converse with each other while they're working, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you're doing your job. And that was their culture. He said, but the team members, because they had tables like this, and the pegboard was here, so then there's a person over here, and they couldn't see them. And then, of course, there's a person over here with a pegboard, and they couldn't see them. So it was hard for them to converse back and forth. And they said, well, it's just not working for us, boss. And so they said, okay, we'll go back to the old way. But see, at Toyota, that's not the mentality. It's not old way, new way, if you don't like it, old way again. It's better way. So we've created this savings. We know exactly what we're getting in terms of improved productivity and savings and costs and all of those things. But our culture is one where we allow the people to talk back and forth, and we want to make it easier for them to do that. So the mentality at Toyota would be, okay, if that were the culture there, they would say, okay, what can we do differently to still maintain the new standard that we have, yet meet your expectation?